Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. You have tuned in to America's home for conservative, not bitter talk. It's my pleasure to be here. I got a bunch of stuff that I want to get to today. Actually, a little bit different maybe than usual. At least it is in my mind as the guy that's behind this microphone talking with you. I've got a lot of things I want to talk about briefly. There's a couple of things I want to kind of sink our roots around, including Dwight K. Schrute. He's got a podcast. I didn't know this. Dwight K. Schrute has a podcast. He had Stephanie Ruhle on from MSNBC, and he's not buying what she's telling him about the media and who's at fault for creating distrust in the media. I've got that. I've got Jen Psaki admitting, ironically as well here, that MSNBC is the place people like to go or expect to go to get negative Trump coverage. That's not what you would admit if you were a media outlet, but she's out there, I guess, very proud of this. There's a lot of stuff. There's an exchange during a Supreme Court hearing that seems completely preposterous to be having. And I've got an update on Senator Van Hollen. He's the one who flew down to smuggle Kilmar Abrego Garcia, I guess, the American hero who's not an American, back into America, who's been deported to El Salvador. By the way, there's news on Mr. Garcia as well. He was pulled over, I think in 2000. We'll get into this. Pulled over in 2022, and he was driving the car of an individual. Well, I'll tell you about it, time permitting. Lots to get to today, my friends. Before we get started, though, I know you care about this country, but you cannot, friends, fight for this country if you are not taking care of yourself. That's why I'm telling you about Solti. Solti is an all-natural, clinically proven way to lower your cholesterol safely. It has lowered the cholesterol of other people per science, per research. Science has spoken on this, and it's safe. There's no prescriptions. There's no doctor visits. All you have to do is take 2 Solti soft gels a day. It is not a drug, but it works for people. It may work for you as well. I take it. I think you should consider doing so yourself. We need healthy, strong Americans, my friend. I'm coming at this completely selfishly. We need you healthy so that we can continue to move this country forward and fight this nonsense, my friends. But the truth is, you've got to be healthy for your family, your business, your church as well. So don't let high cholesterol slow you down. Go to Solti.com, SOLTEA. Promo code Todd will get you 50% off and free shipping to boot. That's Solti.com. Promo code Todd. Take care of your heart, my friends, because selfishly, I need you in this fight. All right, so let's start here. Senator Chris Van Hollen. This is fantastic, by the way. Someone has gone through. You know, the internet, the internet creates a digital paper trail, I guess, if that's the way you want to say it. That's the way I'm saying it right now. But it creates a digital trail or a digital paper trail for those of us who grew up in the 1980s or before. And Chris Van Hollen has been exposed by his digital footprint, his digital paper trail. Headline here, townhall.com. Van Hollen's post from 2017 on MS-13 comes back to haunt him, written by Rebecca Downs over at Town Hall. I'm going to scroll down and read a tweet. This was back when it was a tweet. When did Musk buy Twitter? It was not this long ago. I don't think. Surely not that long. Yeah, it's a long time ago. 2017 is when this tweet was actually posted on Twitter, that's what it was at the time, Senator Chris Van Hollen, who, of course, was a senator back in those days as well. People stay in the Senate for as long as possible. In fact, Dick Durbin just announced yesterday that he is retiring after a mere 44 years in the U.S. Senate. He's ready to call it quits. And I know some people think, well, here's a chance, for someone to be chosen. No, they've already I'm telling you, this isn't just something that was announced out of the clear blue sky. This stuff is orchestrated behind the scenes. It's one of the concerns I have. I'm not against term limits by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm against term limits for when those folks who are in favor of them think that this solves our problem. That doesn't solve our problem. The only solution to the problem of corruption in government or having these insane people running the show is to hold them accountable, is to be involved in what is going on. And I think some people, not everybody, have an incorrect perspective, thinking that a term limit is going to somehow protect us against that. That, my friends, is simply crazy talk. Anyway, here's what Chris Van Hollen tweeted August 2nd, 2017 at 6:12 p.m. My friends, shame on President Trump for tearing apart hardworking immigrant families. We should be focused, here's the important part, we should be focused on MS-13, not scholarship winners. Now, remember, the guy he just met with, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the American hero who's not American, is now in prison in El Salvador. Chris Van Hollen went down there, staged a photo shoot, tries to make this about something that it's not, talks about him, slip of the tongue. Yesterday, we played this on the program where he started to refer to Mr. Garcia as American. America, he paused and said what was the word he used? It wasn't confiscated, but basically someone ripped off the streets of America. That wasn't the term. I can't think of the term he used at the moment. But he caught himself. He didn't want to call him American because he's not American, which means, now pause here. I'm going to say something. Which means he can't be here if you're not American without the permission of our country. I got an email a few weeks ago saying, can you at least point out that there are people who are here legally? They're permanent legal residents of this country. Yes, I will do that. This isn't about hating people who are not from America. This is about holding people accountable who have come into our country illegally. And there are plenty of people who are not born American, who are not, they have to go through the process either to become a citizen or to get their permanent legal resident status. And that's totally legit and totally legal. We can't lump those people in. This guy's none of that. This guy is a problem on the streets of Maryland. And Chris Van Hollen, looking at those MS-13 tattoos on the guy's knuckles in El Salvador, wants to bring him back to America. But in 2017, Chris Van Hollen seemed to have a much more reasonable position, saying that Trump should be focused on MS-13 and not scholarship winners. So let me give you the full context here, and I'll read from this article really briefly. Chris Van Hollen has been talking quite a bit about Maryland man, in quotation marks, or Maryland father, just a good old American dad, deported illegal immigrant whose real name is Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. This name is growing. I don't know. I saw Armando somewhere else, but it wasn't there initially. It was just Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now it's Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. He has a nickname with MS-13 too, if you read the reports from law enforcement. Anyway, the Trump administration has provided evidence that Abrego Garcia is a member of MS-13 with the release of documents last week. These are the documents I just referenced, coming the same day that Van Hollen traveled to El Salvador to visit Abrego Garcia. Van Hollen's focus becomes even more curious given that back in 2017, during the first Trump administration, he was posting to his X account about concerns with MS-13 gang members. Shame on President Trump for tearing apart hard-working immigrant families, Van Hollen lamented in a post from close to 8 years ago. 8 years ago, he was concerned about MS-13. Now, Trump deports someone who's a member of MS-13, who had allegedly a member of MS-13, who had a deportation order. And now that's not good enough. In fact, Chris Van Hollen has made it his personal mission to smuggle, I guess, like a coyote back into the country, Mr. Garcia. Okay. Van Hollen was referencing, at the time of this tweet, the deportation of Lisandro Claros Saravia, who went on to become a rising soccer star in El Salvador. So, that's the resurfacing of such a post, which now has over 200 replies, is full of people recently calling on the senator to show more care and concern about his own actual constituents rather than illegal immigrants. Remember that piece in the Politico, the piece I should say in Politico, said this guy was a constituent. He's not this is amazing to me. If I travel to Italy this afternoon, which I'm not, and I show up in Italy, I'm not suddenly represented by the governing officials. I am someone who is there in their country as a guest. I'm under the laws of their country, but I'm not a constituent. They don't represent me. That's just not the way that this works. But the links to which they go, the left, the media, the 7 pillars of propaganda go to make this be something that it's not. But I find it quite interesting here. Van Hollen is a complete phony. He's a complete phony. You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me, you remember years ago when Trump was president in his first term, this is when Dramocrats really become Dramocrats. They've got the opportunity for virtue signaling. They got the opportunity for political theater. And they take it, right? They have to demonstrate. They try to evoke emotions from people who are watching this, reading about this, and so forth. AOC went down to the southern border. You remember this? She's dressed all in white. I remember this. She puts her head in her hands like this, sobbing, fake crying. Sorry, I had my mouth covered there. Not good for radio. But she was crying into her hands. My friends, fake crying into her hands, because she wanted you to believe that she was standing outside make-believe cages that were created for imaginary children because there were none there. The social media posts, I don't know if it's still out there. I know the stories about it are still out there online. She's staged a photo shoot. She wanted to create an emotional appeal to people who saw this. The story at the time was that Trump was putting children in cages along the southern border. So she went down there to cry at a fake photo shoot where there were no kids in cages. There were no kids. There were no cages. And she fake cried about it and wanted it to look like, of course, she cared. And the people on the left, the Democrat Party, were trying to stop the evils of this dictator, this fascist Adolf Hitler 2.0. And that's what they ran with. They posted that. It was pathetic. I said at the time, look, friends, we have to know who we're dealing with here. And I'm Chris Van Hollen. You have now entered the club. You have now entered the club officially with AOC. You've entered the club officially. You've become a complete Dramocrat. You've shown that this is not about principle. This is proof. This is evidence, at least, that you are a complete phony. Because if in 2017 you thought that Trump should deport MS-13 gang members, why are you suddenly against this one? Why are you suddenly looking to virtue signal Why are you suddenly looking to make a political theater act about this? Why? Why? Because again, they're trying to control the narrative. They're trying to stop the momentum of President Donald Trump. I've got some news about that in the stack of stuff here today as well that I'll get to, time permitting. But if someone acts like this, to me, and I don't care which side of the aisle they're on, if you're wrong about an issue, okay, you're human. If you believe, for example, let's say that you're in favor of what Trump's doing with these tariffs. And let's say that after 6 months or a year or whatever this turns out to be, hopefully it's a lot less than that, but after some period of time you realize these tariffs didn't work. I can forgive that, or vice versa. Maybe you're vehemently against the tariffs. I understand that. And after 90 days, you see, by the way, the White House says that there's 18 trade deals that are on paper before it now, that they're trying to negotiate with these countries around the world regarding the way that our exports are treated, or our exports being imported into their countries are treated, and all that sort of stuff, which we've talked about on this program. And just the trade deficit and all that sort of stuff with different places around the world. And just having America treated fairly, again. Having America treated fairly in the International Trade Department. There's 18 deals, Trump's White House says, on paper. I've got that in the stack of stuff here. But let's say you're against these tariffs. Let's say there's no deals that are negotiated. Let's say that these tariffs just cause the world economy to come to a grinding halt. Then that's, people like me who've said we see the benefit, we see how this can turn the tide and fix some of the stuff that's been happening to this country over, decades. Then those are reasonable disagreements. What is not reasonable, however, is I'm not against political theater. I'm not against good, purposeful political theater in the sense that sometimes you have to make a point. I engage in a little bit of fun here from time to time. But the problem is, it depends what you mean by theater, right? I'll engage in hyperbole or sarcasm, a little mockery, just going through some different things to make a point, different rhetorical devices, different strategies to to drive home a point or to communicate an idea. That's fine. But when it's used to deceive or to make up out of whole cloth an issue, I've got a problem with that. And I think reasonable people all around this country on both sides of the aisle, now they may side with Van Hollen because he's on their side, but I think most people have a problem with that. We don't want people in Congress who are lying about what an issue is. We don't want political opportunists who behind closed doors are talking about strategizing for ways to become, for example, the party's forerunner for the Republican Party, or the Democrat Party in this case, and they're willing to go through this process, creating a phony narrative so that they can get some bonus points and, kind of own that space and be the person that's people look to as, someone that could be the leader of the Democrat Party or whatever. We don't like this stuff. Reasonable people do not like this stuff. I personally think you engage in something like this. You can be wrong, like I said, and I don't have the same standard because sometimes we're just wrong. Sometimes we don't know how something will play out. Sometimes we have to make decisions based on information. We just don't know what's going to happen next in the story. I understand that sometimes ideas are not allowed to materialize and take root, whatever the case may be. But when you do something like this, I think you've completely shown your constituents that you are not worthy of their vote. I don't care what office or what political party. Chris Van Hollen, he wouldn't have gotten my vote anyway because he's a Democrat who supports this radical nonsense. But all the ideas aside, all that stuff aside, which is a big deal, granted, you behave like this, you should not. You should not be able to hold political office. I'm not saying by law, I'm saying by response of the actual constituents, the people who are actually voting legally. They should say that guy can't be trusted. You know, some people say, well, Todd, you know, you're a Christian. Jesus says to forgive. Well, that's exactly right. I have no desire to personally hold this guy or to get even with this guy. Forgiveness ultimately means I give up my right to get equal with you. I'm just saying we have to be mature adults here and say, if you're going to do this, engage in this kind of behavior, lie to your constituents, make up things, not behave on principle. I can respect. I have a weird respect for Bernie Sanders. I do. Bernie Sanders is a lot of things. He's manipulated the system. He's a socialist who's got mansions. But I think he's a true believer in his ideas. I do, to a degree. To a degree. A lot of these folks will peddle whatever they need to peddle if it helps them to stay in power. They don't really believe anything. It's whatever sticks is what they're behind. So I have a weird respect for Bernie Sanders, even though he's routinely and consistently wrong. At least I think he's making arguments based upon what he believes in his delusional worldview to be real. Chris Van Hollen's not doing that. Chris Van Hollen is behaving like a complete phony. And we as adults, we can be forgiving and say, look, I hope Chris Van Hollen repents and doesn't ever behave like this again, but he's violated our trust. It's not just a misstep. It's not just misspeaking. It's not just doing something that is a genuine error. He is proactively thinking about ways to deceive us and to make this into a shenanigan that it's not. Because in 2017, he was totally fine with Trump deporting MS-13 gang members. Now suddenly he's the biggest offender of that very thing happening. Got to take a break here, my friends. Before I do that, are you tired of your hard-earned dollars being used at businesses that then turn around and support leftist causes with those dollars? That is why we created Freedom Marketplace. It is a free, searchable directory of businesses that share your values. These are businesses that have vowed not to support leftist candidates or leftist causes. There's no strings attached here. There's no cost. Just good, patriotic businesses pushing in the same direction that you are. Check it out today, freedommarketplace.net. freedommarketplace.net. Liberty and business for all. I have to take a time out, my friends. Sit tight, back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I mentioned this in the first segment. We're going to move on from Chris Van Hollen here, but I referenced this. I want to read this to you. Headline at foxbusiness.com. White House says Trump administration has 18 trade proposals on paper. President Trump is also setting the stage for a deal with China, according to Karoline Leavitt. I'm just going to read a bit of this because I brought it up and I just want to reference it. This is in our stack of stuff on the website. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said the Trump administration now has, quote, 18 proposals on paper for trade deals following the implementation of its latest tariffs. I spoke to our entire trade team this morning. This was yesterday. There's a lot of progress being made. We now have 18 proposals on paper that have been brought to the trade team. Again, these are proposals on paper that countries have proposed to the Trump administration and our government. So, that is the progress that has been made regarding trade deals that have been negotiated, are being negotiated by the trade team in the Trump administration. I bring that up because I referenced it last segment. So again, it's at the stack of stuff at toddhuffshow.com. If you want to read the full story, whatever, it's a Fox Business article as well if you just want to Google it. But there you have it. Now, I also kind of alluded to this. I don't know if I directly did, but I alluded to it, at least in my brain as I was talking about the people who have been duped by media. Of course, the media is one of the 7 pillars of propaganda, which this is going to be relevant to a conversation, a discussion we're going to have next hour. Dwight K. Schrute's podcast. That's actually Rainn Wilson, but to me, he's Dwight K. Schrute. But he has a podcast. He had Stephanie Ruhle on, and they were talking about this very, very thing. So we'll get into that in the next hour. But for the time being, suffice it to say that when I was talking in our last segment just about manipulation and its effectiveness and Chris Van Hollen using political theater, not just to make home a point that's good and true and needs to be communicated, needs to cut through the clutter. That's why political theater can be good. Political theater can be good if you capture the attention of people and you help them to see something for what it is that maybe they didn't see before. It's not good if you use political theater to make up an issue out of whole cloth or pretend something is something that it isn't. That's how Chris Van Hollen is using it. That's how AOC is using it. And fortunately, this stuff doesn't work as well as it once did. One of the reasons this stuff used to work like a charm, and I think it's one of the reasons the Democrats are struggling here, but one of the reasons that this used to work like a charm was that you had a legacy media, the mainstream media in place. And this media, they would all work together in unison. I remember listening to Rush all these years ago, Rush Limbaugh, who, by the way, I'll say this. Rush Limbaugh, I had a guy early on who told me he was looking for the next Rush Limbaugh and asked if I was him, and I said no. He kind of acted all shocked in return. He's one of the guys in the industry. And I said, listen, there's no one that's going to be Rush Limbaugh. I'm not trying to be Rush Limbaugh. I'm trying to be me. I'm not trying to be Rush. But at the same time, I hope that you see some of Rush's fingerprints on this program, for those of you who listen to him, because he certainly impacted some of the ways that I think and talk about these issues. And it's because he did such a fantastic job in so many ways. But in one of the ways he did a fantastic job was in his illustration of media deception. And I remember Rush used to play montages of clips, different media sources, at the time, we didn't have quite as many, right? I mean, in Rush's early days, it was the New York Times, the Washington Post, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN made an appearance. It got some traction. But there wasn't until later in Rush's career, some of these other alternative news sources and so forth. But it was very controlled. The media was very controlled. They knew the power that they had, and they were not about to let go of that. And they would often, you would turn on ABC News at 6, whatever time it came on, 6 or 6:30, the evening news, and the stories that they talked about there with Peter Jennings, or I guess I don't know when they came on, but you know who I'm talking about, these sorts of folks. The stories they talked about on ABC, if you would have flipped it over to NBC, was the same stories. CBS, same thing. Now, there's obviously days where that's going to be the case. For example, on 9/11, everybody would have been talking about the tragic and horrible events of that day. But on a regular news day, for all the days of the year, do you think it makes sense that all of these places have effectively the same things that they're talking about? It doesn't make sense. I remember also when George W. Bush was looking for a running mate in 2000. I remember he had Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was tasked with trying to find a vice presidential running mate for George W. Bush. And through the process, or maybe it was the plan all along, George W. Bush said, "I want it to be you." Dick Cheney accepted that. And when he did accept it, there was a bunch of people out there in the media that used the term. In fact, if you do an internet search for this term, I don't know how this works specifically, but if you do an internet search for the term gravitas, if you see a graph, sometimes you see graphs of the use of words. I think it was 2000. I think it was, late 99 or 2000. There would be a big blip in the chart, in the line graph on the year 2000, because that term was used incessantly. I've heard it probably used 20 times in media since 2000. On that day, during that week in 2000, I bet I heard it 5,000 times. That's hyperbole, by the way. But I heard it many, many, many times from every source. This administration, this ticket just doesn't have the necessary gravitas. It doesn't have the gravitas. This doesn't have the gravitas, all over the place. And so they have this hold on the way the American people think, because it's not just what they talk about, it's what they leave out. It's how they talk about it. And so I'm setting up this story here, the nationalpulse.com. Nationalpulse.com, headline here says, "Okay, boomer." Now this, of course, is a phrase that, in fact, one of my good buddies says his kids say it to him. "Okay, boomer." It's basically a phrase that means, I don't know the slang specifically, but it basically means, hey, old, out-of-touch dude, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not young and hip anymore. Boomer referring to the boomer, that's a term for the what's the name of the generation here? The baby boomers. There we go. The baby boomers. And that means, hey, you're out of touch, you're old, you don't know what you're talking about. So that's the headline here. Trump would have a +4 approval rating without the over 70s, without the boomers, baby boomers. Why? Interesting here, my friends. If you read this study, this is Real Clear Politics polling, and it shows overall Trump across all demographics, all age demographics, is either slightly has a net positive approval rating or is tied. So, for example, in the 18 to 20, this is mind-boggling. In the 18 to 29 demographic, Trump has a +2 positive approval rating. In the 30 to 39-year-old bracket, he's at +9. In the 40 to 49-year-old bracket, which is mine, he's tied. In the 50 to 59-year-old bracket, he's got a +3. 60 to 69 bracket, he's +5. But if you go to the 70 to 79-year-old bracket, he is negative, I think it was -14. It's the only group that he's not tied or with a positive rating. And the author of this piece here at the pulse.com basically says, look, the reason is because the things I was just describing at the beginning of this segment, the effectiveness of the media, that's still where these folks, the legacy media, the mainstream media, this is where they still go for information. And they're still falling prey, I guess, or it's the 70-plus group. They're still falling prey to the media narrative on Trump. They're falling prey to the old games that were being played. But it's not working on the younger generations, which is quite telling, quite fascinating, and I think very good news. More on this on the other side of the break. My friends, sit tight. Back here in just a minute. Back, my friends. Welcome back. I don't know if I got my mic turned on there at first. Good to be back. Final segment of this, the first hour of the program. I want to kind of wrap up what we were talking about last segment and set up our next hour, because we're going to talk more about the media. I've got this podcast with Dwight K. Schrute talking with Stephanie Ruhle. I've got Jen Psaki explaining how MSNBC is where people know to go to expect negative coverage of President Trump, which is interesting because I thought if you were in the media business that you would expect people to hear a series of, information about what happened today, what's going on, what the arguments are about, not to see someone completely just smeared by a particular station. Anyway, before I do that, though, my friends, let me ask you, do you love seafood? And I mean real seafood. If you do, check out Kenai Fish. They're family-owned company that delivers wild-caught Alaskan seafood straight to your door. Their salmon is harvested from the pristine Kenai and Castleoff rivers in Alaska, vacuum sealed. It's shipped to you via next day air. That's all done to lock in that fresh, just caught flavor. They've got sockeye, they've got coho, they've got king salmon. But it doesn't stop there. They've got halibut from the Gulf of Alaska. It's mild, it's sweet, it's perfect for any recipe. They've got shellfish like king crab and snow crab and scallops. This is the best Alaska has to offer. No middleman, no sitting on store shelves, no coming by truck, no worries about whether this is fresh or not. This, my friends, is fresh, and it will come straight to your door. It's the best Alaska has to offer. Kenai Fish is about quality, sustainability, and supporting hard-working fishermen in our country. Go to KenaiFish.com. Kenai, that's how you spell Kenai. KenaiFish.com. Promo code Todd will save you 15% on your order. That's KenaiFish.com. Kenai. KenaiFish.com. You'll taste the difference. You'll be hooked. And if you use the code Todd during checkout, you'll save 15%. All right, so just a couple minutes here. That's perfect to kind of summarize this and then set up what we're going to talk about in the next hour. And so, going back to what I was talking about prior to the end of last segment, there is, sorry here, as I've made a mess here of my, oh my, hold on here, my friends. There we go. Okay, so we have a media who used to have a lot of power. And I think in a weird way, they still do have a lot of power. Because some people, like this demographic appears to have done, they've kind of doubled down. So I got to tell you, I was wrong about this. Back when the internet started to get more attention with the blogosphere, and you had conservative media sources, I thought, okay, now people are going to get the information that they need. And they still have the opportunity to do that. However, that has been the case for a lot of people. That's why when you look at these demographics, by age demographics, you'll see that people don't believe all the negative stuff they're told about Trump. I still think there are people in all of these groups that believe the lies, but there's more of them who don't. In the 20-year-old demographic, Trump's positive approval rate, he's got a +2 in the net favorability. 30-year-old demographic, he's +9. He's tied in the 40s, +3 in the 50s, +5 in the 60-year-old demographic. So people are learning that what they've been told by the media isn't accurate. It's not the only way to view something, or it's really literally the last way we possibly should view a particular topic, subject, or individual. So that's what we've got kind of going on here. But for the 70-year-old, 70-plus demographic, they're still at a -14, I think it was, approval rating for Trump. And so I thought back in the day, get these different media sources, people are going to say, hey, that's not really accurate. What this guy's saying over here makes more sense. We've been lied to by the media. I'll never forget, on this program several years ago, I had an individual who reached out to me. His name, well, I won't tell you his name. He had friends that listened to this program, and he told me at the end of our time together, he had to reach out because he was a liberal, he lost a bet, a bunch of stuff going on there, and he had to basically, carry out a punishment on himself, kind of a la Impractical Jokers or something. And at the end of our time together, he was very complimentary to how we handled it, but he also said, I think the media has been lying to me. I said, you think so? You think the media has been lying? Yes, they've been lying to you, but he caught on. Some people aren't catching on is the point. Some people, especially when they were taught to trust the media, when they were taught, they might have watched Walter Cronkite back in the day. This is a guy who is viewed as the kind of untouchable in sense of media credibility, although I'm not suggesting that's the case. I'm just saying that that's how people thought about it back in the day. And so people are still being lied to and deceived, especially the more seasoned, I'm not going to say older, the more seasoned they are in life, the more life experience they have. It appears that some of these folks haven't caught on to the fact that they are being manipulated and lied to by these media sources. More on that on the other side, the top of the hour. Gotta go, SDG.